Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at.
Well, we basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.
Israel reportedly violates a ceasefire deal with Iran. Local terrorism specialist has analysis. And Governor Pritzker may be running for a third term. Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in. And now to some of today's top stories. Chicago police officer Crystal Rivera is being remembered at a visitation at this hour in the Schorsch Village neighborhood. Rivera was shot and killed earlier this month in the line of duty by so-called friendly fire when a fellow officer discharged his weapon during a tactical operation. The 36-year-old had served the Chicago Police Department for 4 years. She's survived by her daughter. Rivera's funeral will be held tomorrow in Forest Park. County data about arrests, criminal case filings, jail bookings, and so much more are all easier to find now with new research from a new tool from Cook County.
This is super important and meaningful to the work that Work Like Live Free Illinois does. Contrary to popular belief, there are other cities in Cook County outside of Chicago. So to have this data available for the entire county is so meaningful.
County officials unveiled the new criminal justice dashboard today, saying it'll promote transparency as well as access to and understanding of data connected to the local criminal justice system. Researchers who developed the dashboard at Loyola Center for Criminal Justice Research say its primary purpose is to identify trends and patterns in criminal justice data. But it also balances that transparency with the privacy of those who are accused of or victims of crime. You think it's hot outside? Imagine beating this heat in a fur coat. Reality for the animals at the Lincoln Park Zoo, but the staff there is helping them keep cool. This is Umande, a western lowland gorilla at the zoo enjoying an ice treat. This gorilla's popsicle is made with diluted juice, sugar-free Kool-Aid, and fresh herbs from the zoo's own herb garden. Meanwhile, Birch, a black bear living in the children's zoo, has a classic pile of crushed ice. There Birch is to munch and paw at. The zoo says every animal with an outdoor habitat also has an indoor option that the animals can choose. And if they still choose the outdoors, there are other ways to keep cool, like streams, shade structures, and even rocks with air conditioning. Because that's what we all need. Up next, local analysis on the conflict between Israel, Iran, and now the United States. Right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Iran and Israel reached a ceasefire deal. Now, this comes a day after Iran launched an attack on a U.S. airbase in Qatar, a retaliation to the U.S. bombing Iran's nuclear sites. But just a day into the ceasefire, the agreement has already been violated. Here's President Donald Trump's reaction.
Well, we basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.
Angry President Trump there. International relationships, of course, and a possible threat to Americans here at home still loom over the situation. Here to weigh in on those issues, as well as the rise in domestic political violence in the United States, is Robert Pape, a political scientist at the University of Chicago and specialist on terrorism. He is with us via Zoom from Wuhan, China. Professor, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So you've been able to project this conflict with Iran and how it might play out. You predicted the first missile strikes would be on the Iranian nuclear sites of Fordow and Natanz. How are you feeling about this ceasefire right now?
I think that we have seen a high-risk mission with very little benefit, and the ceasefire is an effort to try to dig us out of this hole. The risks here are clearly evident. Once you launch these airstrikes, this is going to provoke a hornet's nest of a conflict As you just heard the president say, Israel and Iran have been at each other for years and years and years. And so once you start bombing, this is going to produce the hornet's nest. This is going to produce the possibility of even further escalation. That's all the risk. The benefit was supposed to be knock out this program. And the program was never likely to be knocked out. This was fully predictable how this would be a futile effort. And the more we've learned, we've just had a classified intelligence estimate leaked in the New York Times. It says nothing. There's no evidence whatsoever we knocked out any nuclear material, any of the centrifuges. We dug some holes, and that's about it.
Right. Yeah. Reports are saying that Iran's nuclear program may have only been set back a matter of months. To that point, last night's guests that we had here on this program both made the case that the attacks over the weekend, including Iran's response just yesterday, were both highly choreographed. Do you agree with that? And how should the American people view that?
Yes, I think that what you are seeing is that it looks like Israel and the United States colluded, and perhaps colluded even with Israel's first strike on the Iranian nuclear program about 2 weeks ago. And then clearly there was collusion here, or an effort by the president to use deception when there were negotiations between the EU and the Iran negotiators to launch another strike, which I don't think had the surprise he was hoping for. And then what you saw is the Israelis and the Americans double-crossed the Iranians twice, lied to them directly to their face, double-crossed them twice, have lost tremendous credibility here. What the Iranians did, though, was really quite shrewd. What they did is they did a limited strike back to the American attack, and they telegraphed it. They told us in advance so we could get all our people protected in that base, and nobody died. This is showing that well, we are being quite reckless, and we are seeing opponents who are being quite shrewd, and we are grossly underestimating our opponents. We've come out of this way behind.
Well, do you think to that end that Iran would trust any peace deal that is negotiated with the U.S. and Israel?
I don't think they'll be caught by surprise again. So trust is not common in international politics. However, there are expectations, I would say. And I think that the idea that the president is going to hoodwink the Iranians again, not likely. I think, in fact, he is not likely to be able to get away with this with many other people around the world. I don't think the Russians are going to fall for any tricks. I don't think the Chinese are going to fall for tricks. The Europeans are not going to fall for this. Everybody, these two double crosses in less than 2 weeks, this is going to go down in history, and this is sending a clear message that any words that come out of the president's mouth here, nobody's really paying much attention to. They have shock value, as you just read. He's using swear words, but does anybody really believe that until we see the behavior, that what Donald Trump says 1 minute is going to happen the next?
Do you think Americans, or should Americans, be concerned about any risks of a possible attack on American soil?
I'm sorry to say, yes, there are risks. The big risk here is not so much a coordinated, command-directed attack from Iran as inspired attacks. And we've seen with American political violence, we've seen inspired attacks already. But this is really a danger, and those inspired attacks could be quite deadly. So TSA has got to stay on its toes here. I don't want to be, I don't want to start going into scenarios because I don't want to basically scare people. But the bottom line is that we have seen inspired attacks before in this country. We just saw some at New Year's Day, and look how many people died on New Year's Day with that ramming attack. So, we need to be on guard.
Because you also argue that we may be on the brink of an extremely violent era in American politics. The U.S. has had a long history of assassinations and political violence, but what makes this moment feel different?
This moment is different because I call this the era of violent populism, and it's been going on for about 5 years. So for the summer of 2020, we had mostly peaceful protests with George Floyd, but 5% of them were riots, and that involved hundreds of thousands of people. It's not small potatoes here. Then we have January 6th, which is, of course, a violent riot that's not just attacking the Capitol, but trying to overturn a duly elected president of the United States in the certification of Joe Biden. Then we have a whole string of assassination attempts against Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, Nancy Pelosi, almost killed her husband. Then two, of course, attempts against Donald Trump. Now we begin this year, 2025, with a whole spate of political violence. We have dozens of attacks against Tesla stations, and almost Governor Shapiro and his whole family was almost burned to death in their home, just minutes away from that.
The lawmakers in Minnesota
so I can just
as
go
well.
on and on. Yes, exactly. And you can see right away, this is not normal. You have to go back to the 1960s, which is beyond most of our lifetimes here, to remember the chaos of anything like this before. And we're just getting started with the summer season. We're just getting started with protests. We're now really teetering on the brink of some quite serious violence.
Well, and among, this growing sort of normalization of political violence in America, you also write that the perpetrators don't necessarily fit the image of who we think they might be. Who are they, and what are we misunderstanding?
Well, we keep looking for the perpetrator to be a card-carrying member of a party. They're a Democrat. Maybe they've been thinking about Democratic politics or they're a Republican. This is a mistake. In fact, what we see over and over again is these are people who are essentially coming from a political side of the aisle, but rejecting normal politics. The Minnesota shooter is just a classic example of what we've seen over the years. This is someone who's clearly a cultural conservative, and he has lots of in his background that's culturally conservative, but he appears to be rejecting being a member of a party. Well, that means if he was somebody who thought parties were good, liked parties, they probably would go through the normal process and become a party activist. It's not happening. These are people who are volatile individuals. They're upset about what's happening in the country. They're coming at it from one side of the aisle. They're attacking somebody on the other side of the aisle. This is what's been going on in our country for years, and we've got to get out of this idea that we can go find and blame the party itself. That said, we do need to look to party leaders to basically bring down the temperature, because these violent individuals are coming from a side of the
What are some
spectrum.
potential solutions? What can bring down the temperature?
The very important thing to do, I've been calling for this for several years, is starting finally to happen, where political leaders start to condemn violence when it's coming from their own side of the political spectrum. And that is starting to happen. So in the case of the Minnesota shooter, you're seeing Mike Johnson, for example. Even Donald Trump issued a statement. However, this is not enough. This is a beginning. It's good. But what we need are much more prominent statements, and actually joint statements. So what would help in this very precarious summer that we're in is if President Donald Trump and Governor Gavin Newsom would get together in a joint conference. And if our own Governor Pritzker would join this would be even better, because these are the way to bring the temperature down.
Professor, we've got about 30 seconds left. You're joining us today, as we mentioned, from Wuhan, China, where you're speaking at a number of different universities over a couple of weeks. How are the Chinese reacting to Donald Trump's actions in Iran and since his inauguration?
Stunned and mystified, which is why I'm here for 12 days and giving talk after talk after talk to audience after audience after audience. They're asking what is going on in America. And I'm here because I've done so much study about American political violence and my work on international security and the Trump, understanding the Trump administration. And that's why I'm here. The world is stunned.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you making some sense of it for us as well, Professor Robert Pape in Wuhan, China for us. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Up next is Governor Pritzker running for a third term. We answer that and more on Spotlight Politics. Governor J.B. Pritzker is set to hold a news conference this week where he will likely announce a run for a third term as governor. Meanwhile, Mayor Brandon Johnson issuing a rare veto to the snap curfew ordinance and a new agreement on Chicago police officers searching vehicles if they smell cannabis. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Heather Sharon and Nick Blumberg. Hey, gang. So, Heather, Governor Pritzker set to announce that he's running for a third term. What do we know about this?
Well, we don't know much. This is based on anonymous sources to a number of news organizations saying that it is time. He has made the decision and he is likely to announce on Thursday that he will become a candidate for a third term as governor, which is a little bit unprecedented in Illinois because the conventional political wisdom is you want to serve 2 terms and go on with your life. But Pritzker apparently is going to try to stay in office, and it's not really clear that he's going to have a serious competitor, either in the Democratic primary or in a general election.
Nick, what does this mean for the possible interest in the 2028 Democratic nomination for president?
Well, I think certainly, Governor Pritzker has to recognize that, as folks have pointed out, a third term carries political risk. Anytime you're in office, you can do things that folks might want to use against you in a campaign, but it also helps him keep his national profile out there. Former governors can be very high profile voices in the party, but a lot of times when you're a former, your profile starts to fade a little bit, and Governor Pritzker absolutely does not want that to happen. Certainly he has got plenty of his own money to help self-fund, a campaign for governor, as well as mounting, potentially a presidential run operation, just shortly after that. But he won't have to resign if, he decides to run for president, should he be reelected, which I think a lot of folks think he would have a very good shot at doing. So this is a way for him to keep his name at the game, in spite of the fact that sometimes folks do want to step away after 2 terms. It's probably timing isn't really right for him if he wants to keep his name up.
He could take a break for 2 years if he wanted to. Heather, who could he be looking at as his running mate? Because, of course, current Lieutenant Governor Stratton, she is running to replace Senator Durbin.
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, a big decision for him because if he does choose to run for president, let's say he wins, the lieutenant governor would become governor. So this is kind of a sort of a race that nobody pays a whole lot of attention to in most cycles, but there will be more attention on it in this cycle. And it will be interesting to see what sort of message he sends with this pick. Is he going to be looking for somebody from the more moderate wing of the party? Because we've seen him really sort of move to sort of be a progressive champion, anti-Trump. It's not clear sort of what calculation he is sort of undergoing there. He doesn't have to make this decision this week. It is, further down the line, but it is sort of one of those high-profile decisions that if he wasn't going to run for a third term, he sort of wouldn't have to make. So high level of difficulty.
And even if he, doesn't, it's not even a question if he doesn't have to make the announcement right now. It's also smart for him not to make the announcement because then that becomes a renewed source of attention on his re-election bid.
Correct.
Of course, but of course we all know he's thinking about it.
Yes.
Nick, the governor did, though. He signed a new bill last week that'll make changes to the Prison Review Board. What are those changes? That's
right. So this does a whole slew of things. For example, victims might be notified, are set to be notified when an offender is released. It gives them the opportunity to make impact statements. It gives them the opportunity to get an order of protection when someone is still incarcerated. It also calls for board members to have more relevant experience, either judicial or law enforcement. Now, this is a less robust package of reforms than one that had started to move through the General Assembly before it stalled last year. That would have done things like make the board's meetings subject to the Open Meetings Act and create this big task force to oversee it. Governor Pritzker and other folks had some questions, largely around the feasibility of those reforms, especially like live streaming the meetings and the fact that there wasn't really any funding tied to that reform effort. So this is a more slimmed down package of reforms, but still one that a lot of advocates were eager to see.
And remind us how we got to these changes.
That's right. This comes after the murder last year of 11-year-old Jaden Perkins. It was at the hands of a man, Crissetti Brand, who'd been harassing Perkins's mother, his former partner. She was unable to get an order of protection against him because the judge said this man is still behind bars, so that's why that was part of the reform package. But one day after the review board approved Brand's release, he attacked Lateria Smith and killed Jaden Perkins. 2 members of the board resigned in the wake of that murder, and Smith has since filed a negligence suit.
Okay. Heather, last week, City Council passed that snap curfew ordinance, Mayor Johnson issuing the rare veto on it. What happens now?
Well, it will become official when it is read into the record at the July 16th City Council meeting, and that will give supporters an attempt to, at least a chance to override that veto. Now, they would need 34 votes on the City Council to do it. That seems, at least right now, a big lift because it passed with just 27 votes. So Alderman Brian Hopkins, who is the lead sponsor, says he's going to try to override it because he is really committed to this being the right path for the city. However, it's not clear that he could say anything to any of his colleagues to change their mind on this issue, which I feel like I've been reporting on since the dawn of time.
Jesus was a baby.
Exactly. Now, is it possible that there is a teen takeover in the next couple of weeks that turns violent, that sort of resets this narrative? Perhaps, but there has not been a teen takeover in Chicago that turned violent since mid-March. At the same time, there have been 3 in Naperville. Each of those have turned violent, and it's not clear whether Chicago police need or want additional tools to help them keep a lid on these gatherings.
Nick, a federal judge blocking the Trump administration from using the state's cooperation with immigration efforts as a condition for receiving transportation funds. Illinois was one of 20 states that was part of that lawsuit. What's next?
Well, this is a preliminary injunction saying that the transportation secretary cannot put these kinds of mandates on the funding that goes to states. Now, Secretary Sean Duffy has vowed to fight this in court, vowed to appeal that decision, calling this judicial activism by an Obama-appointed judge. But this is just one of many lawsuits that Illinois and other states have been launching against the Trump administration for these sorts of funding freezes, conditions, clawbacks, things that they say are not a legal precondition or a legal way to treat that money that is promised to states.
Okay. Heather, you reporting today that there's a new agreement on when and why Chicago police officers can search vehicles if they smell cannabis. Tell us about these new rules.
Well, it's complicated because it involves the consent decree, and everything involving the consent decree is complicated. But essentially, the coalition of police reform groups led by the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois said that CPD was impermissibly trying to rewrite their policy for investigatory searches to allow officers to search a vehicle if they smell raw cannabis. Now, this is based on an Illinois Supreme Court decision that said that that was a permissible reason to search a car since state law requires raw cannabis to be kept in an airtight container in cars. Now, however, the coalition said nope, the consent decree said no searches based just on the smell of cannabis, either burnt or raw. And they said today in a court filing that they had reached an agreement and they were relieved that CPD had sort of dropped this push and that in this policy it will only be permissible for officers to search a car if they smell cannabis, raw cannabis, if they have another reason to suspect criminal activity. So it's complicated, but it is a very important sort of, push towards resolving these issues at the heart of the consent decree.
You've also done some reporting on the city's 28-year contract with ComEd. It expired a little over 4 years ago, but there is still no new one. Why not?
Well, back in 1992, the big issue was in weeks like this where it was very hot, there were frequent and very serious power outages. People didn't have AC, they couldn't keep their food cold, and that agreement, inked all the way back when I was in high school, was designed to prevent those outages.
She was reporting on it then.
Yeah,
yeah.
I was. But since then, City and ComEd really haven't started negotiating in earnest over a new deal. Now, there was a bunch of flurry of activity all the way back in 2020 when ComEd found itself embroiled in the middle of the scandal that would eventually lead to former House Speaker Michael Madigan's conviction and now looming incarceration. It's not clear why there's been no sort of, moving forward on this, but it means that the city has not been able to make changes to this really old agreement that reflects, the 21st century.
Oh, that. 30 seconds left, Nick, because everyone in Northern Illinois is going to be paying more for electricity this summer. Why?
That's right. Those prices are going up some 45 to 50%. Utilities like ComEd say they're paying higher prices at recent, power capacity auctions because there's more demand from data centers, which are cropping up all over in Illinois, and there hasn't been enough renewable energy added into the pipeline. There was a push to make some more of that happen, as well as provide relief from bills for low-income on consumers in the most recent General Assembly. That did not move forward. We should find out our new rates, post-summer rates in October, but we have not heard yet from ComEd what those will be. So
they don't have
watch
anything
out for
going
those
on.
bills.
Yeah, all right. That's Spotlight. Heather Sharon, Nick Blumberg. Thanks, team. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Be sure to sign up for our free email newsletter, The Daily Chicagoan, at WTTW.com/newsletter. You can also stay connected by following us on Blue Sky at WTTW. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Finally, what started out as a beautiful day at the beach soon turned into a virtual monsoon. Even our cameraman got soaked. Sorry about that, Damon. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that serves the needs of clients in the Chicago area and throughout the nation.